Before we dig in, I do want to thank this month's sponsor, Barbara Kyle. Barbara Kyle is a novelist, and she is also a book editor and coach. So she has a free webinar running next month, 3 things agents and publishers must see in your first 30 pages. You can register and learn from her. If you take a picture of this slide, the QR code specifically, that's going to take you to the link that you see on the slide. If this is coming at you too fast and you don't get a chance to capture the link, you can catch it on the recording. And it's also going to be included in my free newsletter coming out on the 14th of September and then on the 28th of September. So thank you, Barbara, for sponsoring this free session and my newsletter this month. Okay, so now we're going to get down to business. I'd like to invite Jackie to come on to the stage with me, and I will properly introduce her. Hello.
Hello,
Welcome.
hello.
So for those who don't know about Jackie's work, she is a children's author. She's written multiple titles across different children's categories. I have a few of her more well-known titles up here on the slide. She maybe is best known for the Lemonade War series. Do you think that's true, Jackie, or maybe something else?
That's definitely kind of the flagship.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So highly recommend taking a look at that book. And if you have kids, you should, of course, buy it for them or get it from the library. And I've got some of the other interesting titles up here, and she's award-winning. She has a new book coming out next year, which we're going to be touching on. It's a graphic novel adaptation of, is it The Lemonade War?
It's The Lemonade War, yeah.
Yeah, so that will be very exciting, and we're going to see a little bit of that as we go. Jackie, before I get underway, is there anything you want to say about your background? And I have some questions that will help people get to know you a little bit better here in a minute, but is there anything you want to add that I haven't mentioned here?
Well, I've been doing this for a long time. When the next book comes out, the graphic novel in the spring, that'll be my 20th published children's book. So I feel like I've been in this space for a long time, but as we all know, things change all the time. So I'm still relatively new to email newsletters, and there's an added little twist, a little quirk, which is that I don't do social media. I did do it for a while, and I've been off it for, I think, at least 5 years. So here we are, kind of in this new space. Substack is suddenly here, and people are talking about this, and people are talking about that, and there's just so much to keep up on in terms of sort of what you focus on. So although I feel like I've been a children's author for a long time, I still just feel like this stuff is very new for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to say for you and everyone attending, I do think it's possible to have a successful newsletter without being on social media. It might
delighted to hear that. Delighted and surprised.
I mean, it might make things a tiny bit tougher, but it's totally navigable. I've never considered a deal breaker. So there will be only one moment when I touch on it. And I think it's justified. Okay. So here is the challenge that you wrote to me about in your own words, that you continue to work or struggle, as you said, with your email newsletter. You feel like you've implemented every suggestion. You've been in my classes about email newsletters, but
yes.
You're just not growing at the rate you wish. So, and you also mentioned you have a 35% open rate, which doesn't knock your socks off.
That's actually gone up. It's now between 40 and 50, but who knows what that really means. But if that has grown, yes, my open rate.
It has. I will say that if you just take an industry average of open rates, like not looking at publishing industry, but looking at all industries, people say a 30 to 40% open rate is actually really good. So I do want to offer that reassurance.
Okay, that's nice. That's nice to hear. Thank you. Let's start with good news.
Yes, that's the good news. But I do think we probably ought to be seeing higher rates for an author newsletter because they tend to enjoy more loyalty, more like name recognition. And so we'll come back to that in a little bit. Before we dig into the metrics, I do have like a few starting questions that I would just like to know this, and I think people attending would benefit from knowing it. Do you enjoy writing this newsletter?
Actually, I've come to enjoy it because I'm getting faster at it. Back when it used to take me a really long time, it was sort of hard to, well, the whole time I was working on it, I was thinking about all the other things I should be doing. And I think that lessened my enjoyment. I mean, I always like writing, so that's not the issue, but just getting the whole thing together. Now that I feel like I've got a format and I found the voice, it goes more quickly. So I can spend just like, 4 to 6 hours and kind of pull one together. And so, yeah, I actually do. I do enjoy doing it.
Okay, that's good news. I like to hear that. Okay, we will not close down the session because you hate it.
No, no.
Do you feel like it's taking time away from other activities you would consider more valuable?
No, not more valuable. It is taking time away from other activities. Everything does. And it's not, I mean, this newsletter doesn't come together just in the blink of an eye. I don't dash it off in 15 minutes. So yes, it does take time, and that is always a consideration, but I consider it very valuable. Maybe
Okay.
you have a different perspective on it, but to me, it feels really valuable. Even if I didn't care about the other stuff, just in terms of connecting with readers, that feels good and important to me. And I like hearing back from people. So yeah.
What kind of response are you getting?
So you mean actually direct response, people getting back in touch with me?
Mhm.
Okay. So, so people always send in for the giveaways. I give away books each month, which again, that's a pleasure. It's like, it's just nice to send either my books or books. I go to a lot of author events. I have a lot of friends who are children's authors. So I buy up books, and it's fun for me to be able to give those away. So I hear from people in that way. And then also, I get thank you cards when the books go out. I get thank you notes, which are really lovely, like really, really nice. People share little bits about their lives. And I get a big response from friends and family because, of course, oh, you told the story about such and such. And so they
Yeah.
respond to that. And then there is a handful, I would say, every month of readers who just say, what you wrote touched me, or I responded to what you wrote because of something in their lives, or I passed this on to somebody, or this really made me laugh, I'm sending it to some friends. These are people I
Yeah.
don't know
Right.
specifically. I'd say that's about the response I get.
So I mean, to me, this spells in my book success because it doesn't feel like you're writing into a vacuum, or at least I wouldn't consider it. When some writers tell me they write their newsletter and they don't hear anything and they don't even feel like it's worth it because they never get someone hitting reply or saying anything in response. But that's not the case here.
No, it's not the case. Although, well, so it's growing. The response I'm getting is growing, which is lovely.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing that I'm feeling is lacking is, well, why aren't I getting kind of more subscribers? That's why
Yeah.
I'm sort of stuck on that idea.
I promise we will we will address that. I promise.
Tell me now, tell me now. But I do want to really say how much I enjoy. I mean, I enjoy writing it, and I really enjoy hearing back from people who have read it and said, hey, liked this.
Yeah. So I think that what I'm ultimately trying to get at here is if it feels like a worthwhile activity to you, because I do feel like that's kind of key for sustainability, no matter how fast or slow it grows, there will be ups, there will be downs. But
And there
I'm
will be plateaus.
and plateaus. Yeah, most of all the plateaus.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it feels like the answer is yes. It's so far, despite, the growth rate not being where we want, it feels meaningful.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So there are already lots of questions coming in about the metrics and I promise we'll get to that meaty stuff.
We
Tiffany's
all
one.
we all like our numbers. We all want to
We
know the
do.
numbers.
We do. So Tiffany is wondering how often you're sending your newsletter, and this is a monthly newsletter.
Once a
And
month.
yeah, so I want to start just briefly kind of characterizing the newsletter from my perspective, like from a strategic perspective, from a content strategy perspective, what I see when I look at what
Great.
you've been sending over the last year. So I love looking at subject lines as a beginning kind of feel for what you're trying to do and who you might be speaking to. And just for those who are listening in on this, Jackie and I exchanged some information before this, but we haven't really dug into the subject lines or, I haven't given her my opinion about this. So, and I didn't question her on a big change either that happened, I saw between January 2024 and February 2024. We're going to get back to that. So what these subject lines tell me is that this is a classic author newsletter for existing readers. And what that means is that people probably aren't going to open this unless they actually want to hear from you. Like they subscribed because they have read your work, they know your work. There's something about you where they're like, I want to be updated on what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're experiencing, etc. So the reason I point this out is because it directly connects into the question of growth and how growth happens. And this is where I'm going to pull out the biggest strategy slide of the whole presentation for everybody's benefit, not just yours, but just everyone. So we're on the same page about this because their Substack has created rampant confusion about how
Yeah.
newsletters work. And for me, someone who's been sending newsletters since 2009, it frustrates me. Okay. So the growing area of interest in email newsletters that's very Substack driven is let's be a creator and let's expand our readership via email. And I have to say, this is time consuming as well as challenging. It puts you in the shoes of someone who is trying to write material that is going to garner attention regardless of who, like whether they know you or not. Like they are inherently interested in the topic or the benefit or the information, or I won't say that it's clickbaity, but it might have that quality to it where it has the potential to go viral. And I hate that phrase, but I think we all know what that means.
Right.
So I think it has more in common with blogging. If you were blogging, or with podcasting, you have to think about, how is this going to attract new people, new readers who've never before seen a book of mine? How am I going to get those people in with this piece of content? So obviously this attracting new readers happens in all kinds of ways. Lately, it's been more newsletter oriented because of the Substack phenomenon. And when people who want this to happen are looking for faster growth, I think, than the average author with a career and a newsletter like yourself. So when I look at your newsletter subject lines and I look at what your long-term goals are going to be, I think it's going to be on the right-hand side of this slide, which is to engage existing readers via email. And so the growth tends to be driven more by you publishing more books.
Right.
Which is not a bad thing.
No.
So I would expect to see really big growth opportunities with each new release. Or if there's some big media event, like you win some major award, or you're on a morning show, or these sorts of things that expose you to people who haven't seen you. So this actually, if you're on the right side of this slide, I do think it takes some of the pressure off as far as what you put in the newsletter, how you structure it, the changes that you make, because people will generally be accepting. They're like along for the ride if they like your books and you stay true to who you are and you don't turn into like the smarmy salesperson. They're generally going to be pretty happy as long as you're, let's say, fairly consistent and you're monthly, like clockwork. And you're using a newsletter service, MailChimp, that is, I consider to be very much aligned with the right side of this slide, and also being not particularly interested in social media, by the way. I use ConvertKit for those who are curious. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer here, but in the author community, I think the big choice, the big favorite is probably MailerLite for those who want to know. But in any case, the growth here tends to be slower. It tends to be more organic. Now, I don't know how this makes you feel, but here's a chance to give me your feedback about this.
So some relief, some relief that I'd rather be on the bright side of the slide than on the left side of the slide. And I guess I get stuck on that word slow, because I don't mind slow. My career grew slowly. I mean, that's how careers grow. And my career grew slowly and it's reached a good place and now it's sustained. So that's nice. But this is very slow. I mean, this feels more like stopped than slow. So I guess I would say I'm not looking to suddenly burst on the scene and have 1,000 new subscribers next month. But I'd like to have like 10 to 20 new ones a month, maybe even that, maybe 10.
Yeah.
10 a month, like, so every year,
Sure.
another 100, 150 more. And that's what I'm not seeing. And I think that's why I'm feeling a
Yeah.
little impatient and wondering if I'm doing something wrong.
Right. I think that's totally achievable. And I'm going to give you some tips for how I think we can get there.
Thank you.
Um, Before I move on, though, I do want to address like a comment in the chat that I think is relevant here. Natalie mentions there are some of us who don't have a book in the publishing pipeline, so the newsletter is something to publish without a gatekeeper. And absolutely, I think that's a very different goal for an email newsletter than what we're discussing here. So if you're trying to build a readership, publish personal essays or poetry, serialize some fiction, and you want to do it through a newsletter, particularly Substack would be the place to go, by all means do that. And your Substack, of course, has social media tools and community to help facilitate you in achieving that goal. So, but I just want to, I think this is a really important distinction to make, because as Jackie and I talk about this challenge she has, we're not going to be putting our creator hat on. I'm not really asking Jackie, to create content that will be a magnet attracting new people who don't know her books. We're really using the books as the foundation of building the newsletter. If you're going to use new content, like blog-like content, podcast-like content, whatever it happens to be, that's fine. But for now, for this session, we're going to be focused on, you have new books coming out regularly. And so we're using that as the engine for the growth.
Right. And I would say this is, again, just particular to me. The Lemonade War and other books in that series, but primarily The Lemonade War, is used so extensively in classrooms, in schools, specifically as a one school, one book read, where the whole school reads the book together.
Yes.
So there are a lot of readers out there. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people who are reading my stuff. I would love to draw them in to want to read my newsletter as well, so that they would then know about my newer books coming out, not just know about the Lemonade War, and also just kind of keep me in mind for school visits and things like that. Just the other things that kind of bolster the, the career.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's when I talk about the reasons for having an email newsletter for authors who are well established like yourself, I often say just staying front of mind with people, even if they don't read the newsletter, is valuable in itself, because it might lead to an invite to a school event or something that pays you money. And sometimes it's hard to know, oh, it's because I sent my newsletter for 13 months straight that this teacher finally reached out. But, I think that's one of the big values here.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes you get feedback where you do see, oh, something, the fact that that person read my newsletter actually did lead to this direct result of either school visit or being invited for a book event or something like that. Yeah.
In the chat, Tutor wonders if it's harder when your readers are children, because presumably you want parents or guardians to sign up for the newsletter, and how do you span that divide? I think this is a good moment to mention that, Jackie, most of your subscribers, at least as far as we can tell, are probably educators and librarians. Is that correct?
Those are my people, teachers and librarians. That's my crew. So I would guess that the majority of my newsletter readers are teachers and librarians, with then a good helping of parents kind of on the side, and very few kids. I don't think there are many kids. Here's how I kind of split that, Adam. My newsletter, especially the opening story, the opening essay, is clearly not written for my readers who are generally grades 3 to 5, grades 2 to 6, let's say. It's clear that that's not, I don't aim for that group at all. At the same time, there's never anything in my newsletter that if somebody in that group read, it would be, inappropriate, or it would be upsetting or something like that. So I do walk that line of, hey, I'm writing for adults, but if a kid wanders into the room, all is well. There's nothing that's gonna.
I would say, just for those who are listening, if you're writing picture books and middle grade books, probably your newsletter is going to be for the educators and the librarians, other children's authors as well.
Yeah, true.
Maybe parents, but it's almost never the kids themselves. But I like your point that if they wander into the room, you still want it to be appropriate.
Every once in a while, I'll get an email from a kid who says, I want to, 10 years old, I want to sign up for your newsletter. I'm like, go ahead, have fun. You'll read the first 2 sentences and then you'll never read it again, but that's okay. I welcome you.
Okay, so let's get to the numbers, which is often people's favorite part. Well, my favorite part, but I know that you're here for the numbers. Okay, So I want to just broadly talk about right track indicators. I mean, I think gut is also a really big indicator here, which we discussed earlier. Like, do you feel like this is worthwhile? Are you getting responses? And I think the answer is generally yes. And I
Yes.
think it's okay to say that means you're on the right track. So if people hit reply and message you, whether they're prompted or not, right track. If people mention reading your newsletter unsolicited, like if you're at a reading or something and someone says, "Oh, I love your newsletter," excellent. If people forward your newsletter or share some of it on social media, that's terrific. Some email service providers will give you that information. It's not entirely reliable, but it gives you a little bit of a hint. You're not on social, so you don't necessarily know that, but I would certainly set up a Google alert to catch some of it if you can. If your list is growing or remaining stable, I consider often stability a win, just because
Okay.
you're going to have we'll talk about this in a moment. You're going to have people bounce off the list for a range of reasons. And so just staying stable is actually a win. And then very few abuse reports. So every email newsletter service provider tracks how many people complain about your newsletter as being like spam or something they didn't sign up for. And
Right.
I don't even think I saw any abuse reports on yours. And I wouldn't,
Not that I know of.
it's not something you typically expect. Maybe one uh, every so often for a list your size. And here I've got just in the on the slide just an example of an unsolicited email from someone who likes my newsletter. And you should expect those to come in every once in a while if you're doing a decent job. Okay, so here is an overview of your open rates from September 2023 to August 2024, so the last year. And I've highlighted your highest open rates. So you have been enjoying better numbers recently. I also have the click rates there. So for those who don't know what a click rate is, that's how many people actually click on a link in the email. And all of these numbers, I just want to underline, these look very healthy. Like there's nothing wrong with the numbers here. It's in line with what I would expect. Although, of course, we often want them to be higher. The other thing I want to point out for everybody, including Jackie, because I know that she's thinking about why 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 are people not opening this more often?
Who are these people who get my newsletter and never open it?
The frustrating thing with email metrics like this is that now the click rate is pretty much a solid figure you can depend on, because when someone clicks, the email service really knows that they clicked, unless you turn off that functionality. I wouldn't suggest turning off that functionality. If you want to know that information, keep it on. But the open rate, who knows? Okay. There are lots of weird factors that affect this. It can depend on whether or not someone loads the images. People who hide their email address in Apple, I won't explain, it's convoluted, but those can make it look like they opened when they didn't, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's healthier generally to look at your trend line or where things are moving directionally rather than like only this number opened. But certainly, there are times when you can see big dips and you can say, oh, what happened that was different there? And I noticed that your open rates have improved once you started changing the subject line in January or February of 2024. So why did you do that?
Oh, goodness, Jade. It's because I didn't understand the way I was doing it. I thought that I don't know, in MailChimp, there are two things. There's a subject line and there's a preview line. I think those are what they're called.
Yes.
And I had somehow thought the subject line would be the thing that everybody would see in their email. And then friends of mine who I'm in an email newsletter group with two other children's authors, and we meet every month to talk about what's working, what's going on. What did you see? We always comment on each other's newsletters. And both of them said something like, if that headline had been the subject line, I think you would have had more people reading. And so I said, well, wasn't my subject line kind of like that? They're like, no, we only see words and deeds January, words and
Yeah.
deeds December, words and deeds
Right.
November. And I didn't realize that. So then we kind of started brainstorming. I said, okay, let's go back over my last 5 issues. What would I have written as the subject line? And I started coming up with more things like this. So now I know
Mm-hmm.
I switched those around. The other one, I type it in, it's in there somewhere, but I don't think it shows up in the newsletter, at the header, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those who don't know, the subject line as expressed in this chart is what actually shows up like in the email. We see the sender name and then we see the subject line. And then depending on what sort of email service you're using, you might see what's called the preview line, which is like the first sentence or two of the email. If you don't customize the preview line, it will pull whatever appears first in the email. And sometimes that's like alt text for your image. So
Yeah.
it's a good practice to engage in to customize. Obviously, you're going to customize the subject line, or I think you should, even if you keep it similar each time as you used to. But you also want to customize that preview text for those who might be seeing it, because it might, get them over the hump of actually opening the email. Okay, so let's dig into this a little bit more. Before I do, I just want to say that I do like that you switched your strategy with the subject line. I think that was obviously something that probably got more opens. I would expect that to continue. You're going to get better open rates. It is a very particular strategy to be, let's say, a little mysterious or to have a little bit of a tease. Yeah, it's a little bit coy. That's not
I'm leaving for good.
Right.
You'll never believe what happened to me.
Exactly.
I don't like stuff like that. So, but I do understand the importance of saying something of interest that people can say, huh.
Right, right. So for those who follow my newsletter, you probably know I tend to be very direct. It's much more informational. So these are different styles. There's not a right style. There's not a wrong style. But it's certainly something you can experiment with and see what happens. Okay. So let's look at the actual email. So it's the name of the newsletter is Words and Deeds. And just FYI, if people want to name their newsletter, like the Jackie Davis author newsletter, that is fine as well. I don't necessarily think you need a special name. It's really up to you. But I do think the header should remind people who you are, like who is sending this. And you do, your name is right there underneath the header. I also think it can be helpful to explain what people are receiving, especially for you, Jackie, because you're only sending once a month and people have short memories.
Right.
So they might not quite realize, oh, I signed up for her author newsletter. So you might even want to have another like little line underneath the author name, or I don't think you need the date for what it's worth.
Okay.
But I think it could help to have a tagline that says something like monthly author newsletter, or whatever right. You want it to say, but informational. And I have mine as an example on the right. I restate what the newsletter is. It's a biweekly newsletter that shares resources for creative people. And I do think you want to tie into the overall branding that you might have elsewhere. This may or may not apply depending on if you have a website, if you're doing other things on social, etc. We're going to come back to the design of this later because I have some advice on it. And I think that, I mentioned the tagline can be useful, which might also explain what they're receiving. In any event, just a little reminder somewhere up at the top about what this is would be useful.
That's great, thanks.
Okay, so let's move on to the body. I would probably be more generous with the font size. Okay. I would also make sure you preview it on mobile. Are you doing that? Are you looking at it on mobile?
I used to. I haven't for a while. I mean, I used to kind of go through the different, there's tablet, there's mobile, there's different things in MailChimp. I haven't for a while.
Just double check that, because sometimes
like every month or just periodically?
Well, if you're consistently using the same template, check the template settings. And it doesn't hurt. Like you probably send this to yourself before it goes out live, like you test it. So, look at it on your phone. It's not a bad habit to get into.
Yeah, sure.
MailChimp in particular sometimes has a different mobile font size than desktop. So I just want to make sure that people are going to be able to read it no matter how they access it. Right. And it does feel just a little small. So it might be 12 point. I don't know. I'm just hazarding a guess. I don't think it would be unusual to have this at 16 point, but see what looks good to you.
Okay.
And then I always assume that people are going to skim email, no matter
Right.
how beautifully written. And the reason I bring this up is because this is a long essay. Like this is just the first little part. Then we
Yeah,
get some
this is what I
photos.
do. I
And
write
we get,
long.
yeah, we get more and we get more. This is not wrong. I'm just saying it's lengthy. So
Yep,
people will need to be
it is.
invested. And this is particularly important. The reason I'm bringing it up in the first place is that it's underneath that essay that we actually get the book stuff. And I know from personal experience that people don't always scroll to the stuff that you think they're going to scroll to. They
Yeah.
don't even know it's there. So for those who know my newsletter, Electric Speed, it's quite short in comparison to yours, Jackie.
Right.
And I have a personal note at the top. It's usually like 200 words. I've had people tell me after a year of subscribing, oh, they didn't know there was more to the newsletter than that. I'm like, but the whole
Oh.
point of the newsletter is actually after the introductory note, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, here's my dream. My dream is that teachers and librarians, people who, you know, are interested in reading and they like to read, get drawn into the story because it's always a story.
Yeah.
That's a switch I made. I don't know. I could get into that whole story about how I switched from the kind of writing I was doing before to this telling a story every month. That they'll get drawn into the story, that the story is interesting enough, either emotional enough or funny enough or just unusual enough, and that they're good pictures. And so they'll get drawn into that. And once they're kind of like reading, then they'll get to the end, they'll just be like, oh, these things are very quick to read after. And then they'll read about my new book coming out or about a book event or about an award or about something like that. That's my fantasy. I know that it's probably not actually true. But that's why I was doing it. That's why I was doing it.
Totally not against you doing it. But I would put in some tools to ensure that for those who aren't fulfilling the fantasy, they find the books.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure.
So the reason I'm going to push this pretty hard over a number of slides. So the subject line doesn't necessarily tell us that the graphic novel is now available for pre-order. I don't think you've put that in your preview or anything.
Story. It's always about the first story, which is always a personal story.
Right.
Not about books. It's always about something personal.
Right. So we're not going to know what new things are happening on the bookend unless we really get down this far. I'm not confident, and let's remember you're open, right? I'm not confident you're getting the full benefit of the newsletter if people aren't getting this far.
Right.
And this is a really important moment too. You've got a pre-order. This was your first announcement of it.
Yeah.
So to me, it's too easy to miss. And so there are ways to compensate. You can still have the long essay if you want, but we have to compensate. Also, I haven't even mentioned there's more underneath that. You know, you've got
it goes on and on.
You have this wonderful classroom project.
Yeah, that was great.
I want people.
I always include some video at the end. There's always some kind of video.
Thank you for mentioning that. I want people to bookmark this comment because we're going to come back to this video and the classroom project. You've got your book giveaway, which we're going to talk about more in every single issue. And then you have a Just for Fun. And you kind of have, like, it's pretty consistent, you know, the different pieces of the newsletter. So each time.
It very much is. Every time you can find this one thing about my books, one thing about an event, a giveaway, and then the fun video at the end.
Right. So if I like sat down to read this from top to bottom, I mean, I don't know how long it would take me, but if I were like thoughtful about it, you know, I would have to set aside at least 5 minutes, maybe 10, which is actually a lot for an email.
I know.
I'm not saying people will not do it. I'm just putting the challenge in perspective.
Yeah, it's not a question of will people do it. It's a question of how many people will do it. Because that's really what we're trying to get to. I know that I have my satisfied, stalwart readers, but I also would like to have new readers.
Yes. So I promise we will get to the fixes, but I want to talk about some other metrics to watch as all of this unfolds. And for those listening, aside from the open rate and the click rate, so how many people open, how many people click, also keep an eye on the bounce rate. So I saw pretty consistently your bounce rate is about 20 to 30 bounces per message. That's when the email is not delivered for some reason. Sometimes it's because the person has an out of office message. That's called a soft bounce. Sometimes it's because the email address is no longer in existence, and that's called a hard bounce. So you had a mix of these, but it was consistent. And so you can't prevent bounces. It's going to happen to everybody, but it should remain consistent. When you see a really high number, it's usually because there's something in your email that has offended the email gods. Who knows what it was? You linked to some site that is considered spammy that day.
Yeah.
You put in the word sex. I find it very unpredictable.
Yeah.
But if you notice it going higher, usually you can figure out what caused it. And MailChimp in particular is very good at giving you the reasons for the bounce. So you can actually read the return receipts, like the actual message that was sent back for why. And
okay, that's great.
But I didn't see a problem here. I'm just kind of that FYI for everyone, because this obviously brings down your growth, because the bounces,
I mean, it's so frustrating to think that I'm sending out this newsletter and a lot of people aren't getting it.
And you're paying too. You're paying to send to people who aren't receiving it.
Yeah.
So email service providers will automatically clean these emails. If it's a hard bounce, they typically get cleaned right away, depending on what the message was. If it's a soft bounce, they usually hold on to them for a few messages until they finally take them off. But it's part of maintaining the health of the list to monitor that. As far as unsubscribes, it was a handful per message. Interestingly, when you started changing your subject lines, you had many more unsubscribes than usual, which it's not a lot. You had 9 instead of 2. But noticeable, right? Because you changed the consistency. So anytime of the subject line. So anytime you make a change, there's this potential for people to be like, I don't recognize that, unsubscribe. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Did it jump 9 unsubscribes in just that one transition mark?
Just that one.
And consistently. Okay, so it's not like from then on I was constantly getting more unsubscribes.
No.
Okay, so it's just an aversion to change.
That's right. That will happen, but the change is for the better.
It's going to happen. So
yeah. The number of replies per message, I would keep track of. Just it can be a gut track. You don't have to do a hash marks or anything. Right. Also look at what people are clicking on. And I
always do. That's so interesting.
Oh, good.
What people want to look at. Yeah.
So the reason I asked people to remember that classroom video project is because it had the highest number of clicks in your most recent newsletter. So people clearly really, I don't know if I think it's partly that it's the videos, people like the videos. But also the classroom project just tells me your readers really are looking maybe for that information.
Teachers and librarians are always looking for new, interesting projects that they can do with the kids related to my book, because they're already using my book, and so they want to come up. And this was a really, it was a really clever project, but also the girl who did it, Mira, she just she knocked it out of the park. She just did such an above and beyond, one of those kind of jobs where the student, you can just tell, really got into it. And so that's very inspirational to teachers and librarians. They love to see that. So I think that's one of the reasons, because it was a longer video. Usually my videos are like 15, 20 seconds. This was a few minutes.
Yeah. I think that's great. In good news, people are clicking on those retail links. So, the bookshop, the Amazon, the Barnes and Noble is actually, I thought it was interesting that it was pretty equivalent. Like there wasn't a preference for one retailer really over another, which that's just good market information to have about the people who buy your books.
Now I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I'm just saying this, I think, is an anomaly in terms of, I mean, I had something to specifically say about the pre-order. So it was my first time mentioning the pre-order. And then I included separate links for, Bookshop, Barnes and Noble, and then Amazon. But also, I don't want to say I gave it a hard sell. It was a harder sell than I usually do. You know, after saying, "Hey, the pre-order's coming out. I'm really excited. Hope you'll pre-order." Then I kind of said,
Let's go
"Librarians,
back.
you know you're going to get this book anyway, so order it now. Teachers, this is going to be
Yes.
great for your classroom. Kids, you know you want
Yeah.
to see this." So, I mean, I don't usually do that. So I
Yeah.
think that was interesting to me because I thought, oh, there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong
No.
with kind of cajoling people along to actually click the button to buy the book, but it's not something I usually do.
Yeah.
So it was different for me.
Well, I mean, I wholeheartedly endorse this. I don't think people are turned off by it, not in an author newsletter.
Yeah.
This is what they're waiting for. They are going to be excited. You've got, kind of an exclusive look at what's going on. And, yes, I would absolutely link to the each retailer. I think this is something that I think even though pre-order is a special moment, I do think there's probably potential for this in every newsletter. Maybe
Yeah.
not to this extent, but
Right.
people love your books. Okay. I also noticed people were clicking on the social media shares. I don't even know where it seems like they're probably sharing it in their own like Facebook groups or Facebook pages, but that's interesting. Facebook was the top one, not surprising to me. And then one thing I couldn't tell, because if people click on the giveaway, it pops open email. So I couldn't tell how many people were clicking on that. How many people are entering those
It
giveaways?
varies widely, but it's not a huge number. I'd say probably 15 people click on the giveaways month to month, but it does vary very widely depending on what book it is or just the particular month.
Okay. We'll come back to the giveaway issue, but that's to me, that's good news. I couldn't tell. And I didn't know if it was like the top thing that people were clicking on, the least, or somewhere in the middle.
I don't get hundreds. It's not like I get hundreds. Sometimes I think people think I get hundreds, and that's why they don't click on it, because they think, oh, I'll never win. I'm like, give it a try. You might win. The competition isn't that stiff.
Okay. So I know that one of your concerns is increasing deliverability and reputation with the email service providers. And so some of this is just practicing good email hygiene. So maintaining steady open rates. We don't want to see huge like fluctuations because that just looks suspicious, usually if it goes low, not if it goes high. Inviting people to hit reply. I don't know how often you explicitly say hit reply and let me know what you think or something like that. But if
I don't do that at all, and I'd like to start doing that. I'm not quite sure I know how. Like, do I put it as a link in the text, or do I make it a button in MailChimp and then it sends me an email? What's the best way to do that?
Well, I mean, to some extent, you're already inviting people to do that with the giveaway, and that's a button. But I would do it more informally. If you do want to, you don't have to do it every time, but usually it's near the end of the message for people who have actually been engaged by what you've written, and you say, I'd love to hear from you, hit reply and tell me blah, blah, blah. So you're making it clear that you're on the other end of that email. It's not.
Right. And I'm interested because I genuinely am. Let me ask you a question though. If it was at the end of the opening kind of story that I wanted to include, hey, has this ever happened to you? Or did you ever, I mean, sometimes I do just rhetorically ask a question in the story, but I could make it more, let me know.
Yeah.
Is there a fear that if people jump out of the newsletter, they won't jump back in and then they miss everything that comes after? And
you're totally safe. Don't worry about that.
All right. Good to know.
Okay, so the next, avoid abuse reports. That's not an issue with you. Usually abuse reports only come into play if you're growing your list by doing giveaways in some other fashion. Like if you ran some sort of promotion on Facebook and people had to give you their email address to get a free ebook, and then you load them all onto your email newsletter. And then the first time you email them, you're going to get a rash of unsubscribes and probably abuse reports. That's when you run into abuse report problems. But that's not relevant here. I wasn't sure, do you have your SPF, DMARC, and DKIM records in place?
Well, Jane, if you could tell me what those are.
Yes.
I have no idea what those are. I've never even heard of them, I don't think. SPF, isn't that sunscreen?
I think it is also a term for sunscreen.
As I speak,
Um,
I think, yeah.
so these are really technical terms. I won't go into the weeds, but this can help with your deliverability. I have screenshotted one of the best guides I know of free
Oh,
online.
great.
Just
Great.
Google Inbox Collective SPF DKIM. There will be very specific place in MailChimp where you can do this. You'll probably be inputting code that you don't understand, and it's okay. Just follow the
Okay.
instructions and it will work. And then if it doesn't, MailChimp support should theoretically help you with that,
Okay.
because it helps them too with deliverability, and they want your messages to be delivered.
Right.
The other thing I noticed when I was checking out your MailChimp account was that if you haven't done it, doesn't look like it, we need to authenticate your domain, your sending domain, which is your website domain.
Okay.
So when you next time you go into MailChimp, just click on that start authentication and it will give you some instructions for how to do that. And it involves putting some code on your Squarespace website.
Okay. And it's not something I can just totally mess up?
Very unlikely. I mean,
Okay.
the way you mess up is that it just doesn't work and then you try it again.
Oh, okay. All right.
So it's nothing that would break your site.
Okay. That's what I imagine. Whole thing crashing down.
So once you set those things up, I would be really curious to learn if you see improvement in the open rates. It may not make a difference, but this is, again, this is just ensuring best practice. We don't want your messages to get stuck for any reason whatsoever.
Right. Right.
So let's dot the I's and cross the T's. All right, so here's like nuts and bolts, what I want you to consider given what we've discussed.
Okay.
This is a really big ask and I don't expect you to do it, but I do think you might have better open rates and better engagement if you sent more frequently, but at a shorter length. And
Oh, okay.
so that would, I'm thinking here like every 2 weeks. I'm not going to delve deeply into that because I think you're going to have to like just let that suggestion marinate for weeks or months.
And let me just ask, I know you're saying shorter, but do you think every 2 weeks following the same general format, which is
No.
a little story, but okay, no, okay, we're
I-
changing
I-
everything.
it's not that I think you're changing everything, but like you might not have book news every 2
Yeah,
weeks, or you
true.
might not have a video every 2 weeks. And so some things might appear still just once a month, but you're kind of swapping out
Okay.
what sorts of things you mention. So that's just something to like think about. You don't have to, but I do think you're going to see better. It raises the potential for more growth. You get more practice in, you see what works.
Right.
Just to me, it's more opportunity. And I don't think people will be exhausted with an every other week schedule. Just based on what I've seen so far, I don't think that's, now if you went every week, maybe that would be too much.
That seems like a lot. And when you say shorter, can you just give me a ballpark? You're saying cut it down to 20% of what it is now, or cut it in half, or
Half, but
half?
I,
Okay.
I don't want you to get tied to.
Yeah, but still, it's good to have like
yeah.
a yardstick, a general
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, it would be nice if people could consume this in 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Okay.
So that might mean shorter personal essays. I don't know. And I think some of this just depends on your gut instinct based on responses you've received over time. I just know that it's a lot to ask people to read.
It is.
If you keep it the same, I would add a table of contents at the top. So MailChimp is actually great for this. Not all email service providers allow you to do this, but they allow you to put a table of contents at the top where people can click and jump to the area of interest. And so that will eliminate this challenge of people will have to scroll through all of the essay. Maybe they'll read it, maybe they won't, but they can see what else is in there that might interest them and they can hop right to it.
Okay.
I don't want to, mess up the art of your subject line because you are following a very particular voice and convention there. But I also wouldn't be shy, like, especially if you go to every 2 weeks, I would not be shy about having a subject line that relates to a big book news event, like my book launches today, or my book is on pre-order, or whatever that news happens to be.
So even if that isn't what the then immediately following story is about, you think it makes sense to kind of right up front say, I've got a new book coming out, or however
I
I did it,
do.
and then go into
Yeah.
that personal story that has nothing to do with that, and then down below it's about the book coming out.
Either way, I think it works. Like if you're increasing the frequency, you may or, there are lots of variables here. So I don't know what changes you may or may not make. But it is okay to have a subject line that doesn't immediately speak to what's in the first slot. As long as
Okay.
you have that table of contents, people
That's good to know.
they will get there, or they'll get it. For my taste, the subject lines are more coy because it really depends if people are interested in that particular, mystery that you've seeded.
Right.
But it's hard for me to argue because your open rates are going up. So, but it's just something, again, to ruminate on. And then I've already mentioned that increased readability. But the one thing, this might be a controversial suggestion. I don't know who designed your newsletter, if it was you or someone else. But the Words and Deeds font and the Can We Talk About Money, it's a very decorative font.
Yep.
And I think when people scroll through email very quickly, they're skimming.
Yeah.
It's not as readable as I would want. I want them to really see right away, what, if that's going to interest them. And it's just a tiny little road bump that I don't want.
It's friction. That's what it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you 100% on this, and I've been thinking about it myself. I fell in love with the font, and it was sort of the feeling I wanted, like free and, free flowing and, just friends sitting around talking and that kind of a feeling. But as I've used it now for over a year and a half, I realized, wow, it really takes up a big chunk of space.
It does.
Sometimes it's hard to read. And
yeah,
I mean, I still love it as sort of it for its decorative part, but functionality, I can
right.
see that it's not that great for functionality. So yeah, I'm with you on that one.
Okay. To go back to the subject line piece, I forgot to mention this, that it's staring me in the face, this slide. You had a newsletter with the subject line, "We never talk about that." And of course, mystery, curiosity, what does she mean?
Tease.
And it's about money. Can we talk about money? And okay, so since this is my topic, right? As like personally, professionally, this is my topic: business, money, writing. And I happen to know that whenever you talk about writing and money in a subject line, in a blog post, it doesn't matter. You are going to immediately double, triple, 5 times the opens, the clicks, the whatevers. And I feel like you missed that.
If I just come out and said it, hey, I'm going to talk about money and writing.
Yes, you
I get that.
People would have been like, oh, she's going to give us the goods. And you do. You like have fascinating information in that newsletter. I loved it.
No, I get that.
So just keep that in mind when you're choosing your subject line.
Sometimes it's more engaging to be straightforward instead of being cute.
Yeah. Okay. Let's take a quick look at your website, because this is going to affect directly signups. And this is, as far as I know, the key way that people sign up, aside from, events that you might be doing.
Yeah, and it definitely is.
That also means that growth is going to be partly based on how many people visit the website. This is always a sticky wicket, because I don't necessarily want you to do anything. I don't want you to start spinning your wheels. How do I get more people to my website? Because that's a whole other conversation. Yeah. But we do want to make sure that the people who end up there are encouraged to sign up. So
yeah, I think the traffic to my website is pretty good. So I don't think I would go spin my wheels on that. But in terms of converting it into people signing up, that would be great.
Okay. So this is the homepage, just the top little part of Jackie's website. And one thing you could consider doing is putting newsletter as a navigation item in the menu.
That's a great idea.
People click on it and then they have the sign up form there, and maybe you can, talk a little bit more about it, have a link to your archive,
for sure,
etc. So that will, I think, could be a really helpful thing, even though you do have a pop-up, which we're going to look at. But sometimes people, they just go through your site so fast. They're clicking all the pop-ups and not even reading what they are.
Right.
So I think having newsletter in the menu could be very beneficial for you. And I know particularly that librarians love newsletters. I was at a librarian conference in April, and people talked about how they're always subscribing to both publisher and author newsletters because they don't want to miss something important coming out.
That's great.
So just to bring up Meg Medina, I mentioned the clinic I did with her some time ago. After our discussion, she put newsletter in her menu. So just, kind of patting myself on the back, she did it.
That must be very satisfying for you to see people. I attended that clinic. That was terrific. I really enjoyed everything that you guys discussed at that.
Yeah, she's for those who want to see another great newsletter in action, she has a good one. And you should subscribe to both Jackie's and Meg's if you're a children's author in particular, to see how it's done. So I think the first mention of your newsletter on the homepage anyway is this box. It comes underneath what we just saw before. Right. So, and of course, people can go and visit Jackie's website. It's very easy to find and take a look for yourself. But after we scroll down this opening image, we get this subscribe box, but it's pretty vanilla. It's not giving us something that we might not see on 100 other author websites.
Right.
So I'd love to see it work harder for you in case people don't go to the newsletter menu tab. If they do see it on the homepage, can we do more? And similarly, the pop-up is better because it has your face, and you say it's once a month, and you give an indication of what's in there. But I think you can go even further. I'm just looking for your voice. It's mainly what I want. Can it be more apparent in the headline? Can it be more apparent in the button that people click? Instead of sign up, join Team Lemonade. I'm not saying you should do that, but just to give you an idea.
No, that's cute. I like it.
So the goal here is no one else can use the copy because it's really targeted to who you are and what you're putting in the newsletter. And so this to me is more of what I consider like a pure marketing approach, which isn't bad. I mean, your email newsletter is a piece of marketing, but I want it to feel like more I'm joining something special.
It's more like an invitation.
Right. Exactly. Using specifics here, like I'll tell you about the time. You can do some of your best hits. Like I tell you about the time I opened a bottle of wine without a corkscrew. So just to give some flavor, of what they're going to get. You asked me, in the lead up to this, if you should have some sort of reader magnet, ethical bribe, essentially giving people a freebie. And I have an example of one from a YA author, Leslie Penelope, who does a free short story. I don't think this is necessary. I'm not convinced for fiction writers that it necessarily is going to grow your list any faster than it would otherwise.
Okay.
I don't think it's wrong, and it's certainly something to test. So if you do have something nice to offer, I'm thinking in your case, it might be a lesson plan or worksheets. You already have some of that on your site, and I don't want you to necessarily take things away from people and put them behind the email newsletter wall, but you could consider, is there something I have that I'm willing to give people as a carrot to get them on the list? And make sure whatever it is that you do give them, just ensure that the newsletter parcels out more of the same. So we don't want it to be totally disconnected from what you would ordinarily do in the newsletter itself.
What I would love to do for something like that, it's funny, you keep saying if you already have something, it's like, well, I'm a writer, I can make new stuff. So what I would love to do is like, from maybe the Lemonade War, take a scene and say, what if it had gone off in this direction, and kind of write a new scene, but then at the end include something for the teachers and kids where there's some sort of, I don't want to say a writing prompt, but some sort of exercise where it could be like, okay, you're reading the book and then look, what if it had gone off in this direction, or what if here's a detail of something that wasn't included, 2 or 3 pages of writing, just short. And then something at the end that the teacher could use to kind of get the kids writing about something. I don't know. I haven't thought it through, but I thought that would be fun to do. And
that would be wonderful.
Offer. That would be nice to offer.
I love that idea, or something like that idea. Yeah.
Great. And so how do I, it's on my website? Is that where I do it? In the sign up. It's part of the sign up.
It's part of the sign up. So, you see here, Leslie says, get a free short story. And then she adds, you're going to be added to my newsletter to receive such and such. So you don't trick people.
No, no.
You tell them this, when you, something like, when you join my newsletter, you're also going to get this. And usually whatever the this is, you have an image of it. So it's really clear and attracts
Right,
attention, as
right.
we see here.
And does all of that fulfillment happen behind the scenes? Does MailChimp take care of
Yeah.
that, or is it? So I
So
don't have to do, it's not like I have to keep track of who's, okay,
nope,
they
nope.
just do it. Okay.
All you
Super.
need to do is make sure in the confirmation email or page, whatever it is that you have set up that tells people you've subscribed, you have a link for people to download that once they've
Oh, as soon as they
subscribed.
get the confirmation email,
Right,
there's the link, they can do it
right.
themselves.
Yep,
Got it.
yep.
It's good.
So the other question, this is separate from the ethical bribe or reader magnet, whatever you want to call it. Should you be doing the free book giveaways in the newsletter itself? And this, I find this is really hard question to answer, especially since I couldn't see the click rates over time. But I would say, because you're serving librarians and educators, I don't know, my sense is that they have a lot of use for these.
Yeah, they
Because
do.
they can give them to kids in need, they can use them in the classroom. Like, I don't know any librarian or teacher who has a big budget. So from that perspective, it could be a nice service to the community. So generally, if you just feel like it's doing good and it's not a particular burden to you, I would probably continue. I would try to encourage more people to click. You might be able to do that instead of saying free book here on the button, you could say enter giveaway. It's, and just sometimes, I don't want to be insulting to the people who read newsletters or my readers, but they don't always get what it is they're supposed to do.
Okay.
I think it's that they're just going through things really quickly,
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
attention span is short. They've got their phones ringing, they've got a text message coming in. So just making it as obvious as possible. Click here to enter giveaway.
Yeah.
And I also
So
wondered if it would be better to have a form, but that's really up to you and your.
a form? You mean instead of a newsletter? Oh, I see. So they
So,
don't click it and go to a newsletter instead.
well, if they click on the button, what happens is it opens up their email software.
Right. Right.
If you are not on your own computer, or
Oh,
if you
right.
don't have that set up properly, sometimes it doesn't happen. And so you don't know how to enter the giveaway because that connection is
Okay.
stunted. There can be lots of reasons why. So if you wanted to maximize, I would consider doing a form at your Squarespace site, and you always link people to that form.
Okay, great.
And it would be
So
an
from my
interesting
newsletter,
test.
I don't have a form in the newsletter. It's that the form has a link that goes to Squarespace form, which then
Yes.
would send me an email. Is that how I end up finding out about
Yes.
it? Okay,
Yes.
I
Or
got
they
it.
all collect in a bucket and then you go when it's time. However,
Yeah.
I don't know what Squarespace's functionality is, but I mean, this does decrease the number of people hitting reply. But my personal opinion is that if you made it a form, you would get more entries. So you'll have to balance those
Okay.
desires.
That's good.
And you can test it and see what happens. If it doesn't work, you can go back to the way you did it.
Right.
All right, so some ideas for list building. And to kind of clarify how and why we're moving through this, I always look at what's happening, what foundation are we building on? How can we make sure this is as effective as possible so that when we do list building activities, or when we get people onto the list, we keep them for longer. So now we come, once you've, gotten all your ducks in a row, now we look at how to grow. So do you mention your newsletter in your email signature?
I do now. That's one of the
Oh, you
things.
do now?
I think you told me to do that, so I do it now. Yep, there's a whole thing that says, it's an automatic thing, sign
Yeah.
up and then get connected, and it's a nice little, it goes straight to the sign up form.
Great. So I highly recommend that. I don't think for those of you who already do this, thumbs up. Just make sure it's not too design oriented. Sometimes people put a lot of language and imagery around it, and I think actually simple is best. Just a sentence and a link. If you were inclined to do any guest blogging, this will give you a big boost relative to how you're growing currently. So And this could just be one thing you do a year. I'm not saying do it every month, but just
Mm.
1 or 2 efforts a year in the right place, you're going to see signups. Definitely, I think you could, get dozens of signups, and that might give you the growth you want for like a 6-month period. That you said 10 to 20 per month or something. I think you could do
And
better than that.
I'm guessing certain guest blogs would probably be better in terms of generating signups for me. How do I research? I mean, is there a way to kind of figure out which are the best blogs that I might want to guest write for? Things I would look for. I'm not looking for specific, just things I would be aware of or look for.
Well, there's really no limit here. Have you done any sort of guest writing before? Would this be
I
totally
did a
new?
while. It's been a while since I've done it.
Okay.
Yeah, I did it more at the beginning of my career than I do now.
So, if since you're targeting librarians and educators, if you did something that would be for a site that they're visiting,
Mm-hmm.
that might be a good place to start. But I'm personally not familiar with what those places are.
Okay, so that's a good thought right there. Just where the librarians and teachers hanging
Yeah.
out.
I also know that many librarians have, or library systems have newsletters that they have to put together, and they'll do like author interviews or author
Mm,
profiles. And so that's another way. You just have to make sure that you always mention your newsletter as part of that
yeah,
interview.
yeah, for sure.
Now, this is the one social media suggestion I have, and I gave the same suggestion to Meg
Oh, I
Medina.
can't believe you looked at my YouTube
Yeah.
channel.
Oh, you don't have one, or at least I
No,
don't think you
I
do.
don't. I don't. It's
Okay.
not, it's just the place that actually Vimeo is where I put most of my videos that I link to from the newsletter.
Oh, that's okay. I'm really what just, tears at my heart is that for both you and Meg, when I went to YouTube, which I think a lot of kids, when they're looking for children's authors, I think they do go to YouTube, maybe they go to TikTok,
Probably true. Yeah.
and they type in the name to see what comes up. And I just really want your channel to come up, even if you're not posting new videos there, simply to create playlists of where you've appeared. So we've got this Harvest Books appearance. We've got some sort of kids family read alouds. There's much more if you keep scrolling down the list. There's a lot of good stuff there. So I would just love
I
for
never
you.
look at it. I couldn't even tell you it's just some weird conglomeration of stuff that I threw up there for different, yeah. I don't curate it at all. I probably should spend some time on that.
So I think all it really requires is creating the YouTube channel if you don't have it yet, and creating playlists of, class visits,
Yeah,
interviews, the
that's a good
Lemonade
thing to do.
series,
Yeah, of course.
etc. And then obviously in the channel description and wherever it makes sense, sign up for my newsletter.
Yeah.
Something that has been really beneficial for me over long periods of time is recommending other people's newsletters without them asking me to, and then they end up recommending mine.
Yeah.
And so
Nice.
this actually happened recently with someone who started out as an acquaintance, is now a friend. He's local in Cincinnati, and he was talking about his business and how he built it up, and developed this really great newsletter that helps him with his marketing. And he didn't tell me to go sign up for it. We're in different industries, but I went and I looked at it and I'm like, this is really cool. And I think writers are going to love this. And so I mentioned it in my newsletter. And within like 3 days, he's like, what did you do?
The power of Jane. It's the Jane bump.
He had the Jane bump. And of course, this, I recommend it out of genuine admiration and
Yeah.
enthusiasm. And so when you do that and people see it, it brings attention to you in a good way, and they tend to want to scratch your back in return. So you can do this informally or formally. I do think, like, let's say you did kick up your frequency to 2 times a month. You might have a small feature that's about recommending another book or talking about another author or having an interview, brief, mini interview with an author, or anything that would be under the umbrella of what I call literary citizenship. So it could be, features of librarians or booksellers, anything that gets people talking and like being so delighted that they appeared.
Right. Sharing in community. Yeah.
Yeah. Then I just want to make sure, since you have a book coming out, it takes Takes discipline sometimes, I think. Just ensuring that subscribe link for your newsletter is in your bio when you're making appearances, that it somehow gets mentioned, that you tell the organizers, please share this, that you put it on the bookmarks or the postcards or the whatevers every single time, because you never know which time is going to be the one that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
So
Let me ask you about two things that have been suggested to me. Just your thoughts on them in terms of, again, putting up, I have a QR code, putting a QR code up at the end of a school visit presentation, kind of throwing it up there and say, teachers and librarians, I have this, and kids, I have a newsletter and I give away free books and I talk about what's going on in my book life, and it's up there for like, I don't know, 10 seconds before I move on to the closing screen. So that's one thing at the end of school visits, because that is a time when I'm interacting with the most number of teachers and librarians, and they're having a very face-to-face experience with me.
Right.
And then the other one I heard is ask your publisher to put it at the end in the maybe a blank page at the end to put something about your newsletter. Do you think publishers do that?
I think some do, and it doesn't hurt to ask. The worst that happens is they say no.
Sure.
But they benefit when you have a newsletter. There is no question. So it's against their interests not to do it.
And yet, so often,
I know
publishers do things against their interests.
I know. Okay. So I just, again, kind of reinforce a point that I made earlier. I think the optimal time for you specifically to grow your list is when a new book releases. So I'd be thinking about all the different ways you can collect those signups at events and tied to this release, giving people a reason to sign up at an event. Like you'll want to come up with some really tantalizing, the teases. You want to this is where I would use the tease. Like I include a lemonade recipe every time. Next one, it's my great grandmother's recipe. And then I mentioned the other things. Just don't ever forget to include it.
Right. It does have to become a mindset.
It does. It does. And the last thing, this is more of a book launch thing, which can be tied to growth of the newsletter. It can be tied to something else. You can think about, are there going to be exclusives for people who pre-order or exclusives for people who are on the newsletter? Just recently, I received this email from Oliver Burkeman. He's written a great book called 4,000 Weeks. I highly recommend it. It's about productivity, but it's not like a serious, like 4-hour work week book. It's for mortals. It's time management for mortals. Anyway, I'm on his newsletter list, and he talks about offering this exclusive live masterclass plus a recording that he's offering to anyone who pre-orders. And of course, if anyone,
that's a big giveaway.
It is, but it sounds maybe like something bigger than it actually is. It's like one Zoom session.
Yeah, great.
So in any event, this can work both ways. It can get people onto your list. If you do something that requires them to register for a Zoom event like this one, or it can be something special that you treat newsletter subscribers to, and hopefully they're going to help spread the word, of course. Anyway, just putting that out there because you have this book coming up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something too you can do with the illustrator of the graphic novel. I don't know what sort of presence she has, or if there's something there that might be beneficial for you to collaborate on.
Yeah, that would be good to think about. How do you get, when you offer an exclusive, how do you make the whole thing work so that you know that they pre-ordered the book and then you know to add?
It's a little bit time intensive, but essentially what happens is you create a form, ideally like a Squarespace form for you, and people attach a receipt, or they hit reply to your newsletter, or they forward you like their Amazon order confirmation page or something.
So it's sort of it's very manual.
It's very manual. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Okay, so we are finally at Q&A time. I know that we're at 15 minutes past the top of the hour. Are you okay to keep going, Jackie?
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Okay.
Absolutely. This is a lot of fun.
All right. So I'm going to pop open the Q&A box. If you put your question in the chat, I would encourage you to put it into the Q&A box. We're certainly not going to get to all of the questions. I apologize in advance, but we're going to take a look at some of the most upvoted questions. Before I get to that, though, I just want to mention the next free session. As we move towards October, we're going to be talking about dealing with the writer demons. So that's going to be with Tiffany Yates Martin on a Sunday, October 13th. Okay, so I'm going to dig into the Q&A. So we have a question from Amran Gawani, who I actually did an email newsletter session with at the end of last year. This was for a Substack specific newsletter. He wonders if I think gaining subscriptions is becoming more difficult because the newsletter genre is getting more saturated. Definitely an issue for anything paid. That's of course not the case here. But I do think one of the issues that I personally see is really weak newsletters being sent because people are being encouraged to do this. And so it can have the effect of making people feel like I don't really need that, or it's not going to be useful, or, you know, all the stereotypes we have about emails that are disrupting our lives and not providing value. So you might have, I think you can get over some of that by the initial approach. So we talked about this, Jackie, you know, with the sign up form, you kind of set the stage there with inviting people in, what the experience is going to be like. You can even crack a joke about this is not your average Substack. You know, I'm not saying be snarky, but you can give people all of the indicators they need to believe this is worthwhile. And linking to your archives too, I think can be useful so people get a sense of what they're going to be receiving. Jackie, do you subscribe to many author newsletters yourself?
Come and go. I subscribe. I look at them because I'm interested in seeing breadth. I want to see like all the different things that people are doing, and I'll have it going for 4 or 5 issues and then unsubscribe because otherwise I would have dozens and dozens coming in. But I'm always on the lookout for anytime anybody says, this is a good newsletter. In our little newsletter group, one of the women said, you know, my favorite newsletter comes from an Indian food truck. It's called Tandoor and Curry. And so immediately all 3 of us subscribed. And then every month we kind of dissected it and said, what is it that makes this so compelling? Like it's poorly designed. Its punctuation is terrible. I mean, it was just a mess. And yet we were so compelled. And so that's where we came up with the Tandoor and Curry hypothesis, which is tell a story. Tell a story about yourself. Open up the door, let people in. So yes, so there are many different kinds of newsletters that I subscribe to and take from each one what it has to offer.
Yeah. I think it's, you know, obviously if you're sending a newsletter, I would advocate subscribe to many from people you're actually interested in.
Yeah.
And see what works and what doesn't. You can use your own judgment here as a guide, assuming the readerships are kind of comparable, like you're not subscribing to something that's totally outside of the community that you're part of, although those can be
very interesting. It's very interesting to see what artists are doing, and so they can open your eyes to different ways of engaging.
So when you see something, I keep a swipe file is the point I ultimately wanted to make of things that you see that you're like, you really slowed down and paid attention to that. And especially the things that get you to act, that get you to buy something or that get you to respond to the writer and remember that the next time you sit down.
Yeah.
Alice is wondering if you also blog, Jackie. I think you shut that down or
I used to have a totally different thing. It was a blog, and that I would go off on all kinds of topics. And I mean, I would just really let myself run wild. And then the newsletter was sort of just more of a update thing. And then I let both of them lapse. There was never a choice to do that. Life got busy. And I just wasn't getting them out. I didn't have a specific schedule for them, so I think that was part of the problem. And so when I finally decided, no, I really do want to revive something, I merged the two. I took both lists and I merged them two. And the first one I said, hey, I'm merging these 2 things. And I got a ton of unsubscribes because these people hadn't heard from me for several years. And I was cross, maybe people who wanted to read the blog didn't want to read the newsletter. So there was some tumult. There was a little bit of upheaval. But I used to blog, and then honestly, I mean, this is why the essay's so long. I feel like it's sort of my blog entry, and maybe I'm indulging something there that I shouldn't be, but no, I don't blog separately. I used to, don't anymore.
Just as a tip for those who are blogging, like an easy way to start a newsletter that isn't additional work is simply to send out that blog post as an email. These are called RSS campaigns. That's like the technical email word for them, because it's just taking taking the blog feed, dropping it into an email and sending it off to people who asked for it. And that's what Substack is, actually. it's a blog that gets delivered via email, and people can still read it even if they don't subscribe. But as far as today's class, I just want to be clear for everyone. We were talking about nothing we talked about really had any relevance to blogging. But if you are thinking about that creator mode that we initially discussed, where you want to attract new readers, blogging has if you're doing a newsletter in creator mode, that is, in my mind, is kind of the same as blogging. You don't have to do both, in my opinion. So Daniela asks something that I think is kind of related to this. She's wondering if you have a long essay to share as a one-off that's also on your website, would you just give the start and then have a button linking to the website in full essay? I wonder if...
What an interesting idea. I'd never thought about that. So just have a little beginning thing and then see if people will go to a different place to finish reading.
I have seen people do that, and I think it can work. So that would be one strategy for having people who want the long story, but you're not filling up the entire email with the full length, and they have to click to your website to go read it. I have no argument with that. The only warning I would issue for, and I don't think this warning is for Jackie, it's for other people, is that I wouldn't necessarily expect that essay sitting on your website to garner a lot of traffic on its own if it's like a personal essay sort of thing, like you're writing. Like, I don't think you're going to start attracting a lot of organic traffic, but I do think it's a useful way to keep the newsletter tighter, and more readable for people who are just skimming.
I wonder if I'd lose people in the transition. I bet
you could
drop off. I bet there's a bit of a drop off. That's one risk to think about. Yeah. Interesting.
Michelle wonders if you put a newsletter in the menu navigation for your website, would you recommend putting an old newsletter on that page so people can read one and know what to expect? Absolutely. Even better, if you're comfortable, I would link to your archive. So for those who don't know what that means, if you use MailChimp or ConvertKit or any of these services, they automatically generate your archive of all past issues, which you can make private, you can make public, and you can even be very selective about which things are public versus private. So that's the tool that I would use. And I do think it's very useful. People, it's very rare that people would just read the archive and visit the archive rather than subscribing. They're just using it to see, is this person going to spam me?
Right, exactly. Do they want to make the commitment to sign up? In MailChimp, it's a very nice thing where you go there and you've got the most recent newsletter in full. It's all there just as it would be if you'd gotten as an email, and then over to the side, you can archive and go back into the archive and look at old issues. So it looks nice.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a little bit of an in-depth question. This is from Chelsea. She says, I'm trying to split my potential newsletter audiences because I believe what my readers who are interested in what I write and my readers who are interested in how I write are groups with some overlap, but that I should run two newsletters addressing those interests. So one audience would be potentially slow and steady, but the second audience could probably grow more quickly and monetize. So she's wondering how much cross-interest content should I include in each newsletter?
Can you go back and remind me, what are the two branches that she identified, the two different types of readers?
So readers who are interested in her writing, she doesn't specify her genre. It could be fiction, could be nonfiction, but then also readers who are interested in how I write. So that sounds to me like writing how-to, writing advice.
Right. Other authors versus the readers of your writing. Got it.
I do think it's wise generally to keep those lists segmented as Chelsea is doing. And if you recall the Leslie Penelope example, she herself has two different newsletters because she has a podcast about writing, and then she has people who love her books and are not writers. So it can be wise to keep those segmented, but you can always point to the other stuff that you do. Like, for instance, at the end of my free newsletter, I mentioned, hey, did you know I have a paid newsletter too? Click here, it's about the publishing industry. So I don't know if you would necessarily duplicate content. You might, but I would probably be sparing with the duplication, and I would instead just remind people, usually at the end of the newsletter, or maybe every once in a while, that you have this other thing that you do as well.
Yeah, I would think it would also be important to consider the proportion of like,
Yeah,
how much do you have to say to other writers?
yeah,
How much do you have to say about what you write? Because if one of them is just an occasional, I mean, definitely in my newsletter, sometimes the subject of it has to do with my process in writing. And I think that's interesting to
it
people
is.
even who aren't authors, but
Yeah,
I wouldn't do it every
right.
month because
Exactly.
then, yeah, it belongs to be, it should be something else. So I would think about how often you're jumping the fence and how often you're going back and forth, and maybe just, if it's mostly one thing, you can always slip in the other
Right.
thing. And I think your readers will still be interested.
Yeah.
That's my guess.
Okay, we're a few minutes from the half hour. I just want to give you, Jackie, a chance to ask any questions that might still be lingering, anything that you want to touch on before we say
Oh, you did
goodbye.
such a good job. You covered a
Thank
lot.
you.
You've really given me a lot to think about. It doesn't, I really feel like we touched on so much that I wanted to talk about. So no, but there's nothing in particular.
Okay, great. Well, you know how to reach me
I do.
by email.
I do. Thank you.
Okay, before we close up, I just want to thank everyone for attending and
Yes.
watching,
Thank you. Thank you.
going through the journey together, for your great questions and comments. And I think that's it. Thank you so much, Jackie, for being
Thank
open
you,
about your
Jane. This has
process.
been a pleasure and an eye-opening experience, and I know that good things are going to come from it. So
Oh,
thanks.
good. Keep us updated on your growth.
I will. Onward, upward.
Yes. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.